We always talk about this disclaimer a little bit, and I finally came up with a good reason for why we have it. Because I'm here to tell you how to do things, and standing in front of a slide that says anything I tell you may or may not be accurate or correct is kind of strange. We started introducing this when we started providing the slide decks online for you to look at later. And more importantly, for other people to look at later who maybe weren't here and didn't hear that extra connective tissue and discussion that went into the things that you see on the slides. And so we don't want people to have the chance to misinterpret and say, well, that's what it said. That said, everything I will show you on the slides and everything I would say will, to my level best, be accurate and correct. This workshop meant to focus more on the technical details rather than provide detailed guidance about how do we support our junior colleagues in developing a career that leads to successful promotion and tenure and all that. Much more focused on, okay, our colleague has been successful and now we're preparing the documentation that will go up through the chain of command and convince the provost that in fact a tenure or promotion is warranted. So department heads, I have some information for you in here, a fair bit actually, but a lot of this is perhaps dedicated more to the office managers and support staff, the people that will actually do the work of telling department heads and candidates, okay, here's what you need to do now. We know where the real work happens, right? So I'll talk for a little bit about the timelines. This is a perfectly appropriate time for this workshop because it's right at the start of the process for pretty much everybody. Again, guidance on constructing the dossier with a little attention to details of what goes into each item, but not too much. We'll talk about the supplementary file pretty briefly, and then I hope to spend enough time to have everybody feel comfortable with what we piloted last year and went fully to this year, and that is the digital submission of dossiers that I hope people who have been involved in are enjoying. If you're having trouble with it, I hope you're reporting in so we can try to make things easier. I'm enjoying the fact that I think we're saving about 100 reams of paper a year by going digital. Process. Here's a too wordy slide. We're in the winter term. If there are people in your unit who are required to be considered for tenure by the end of next academic year, so June 15th of 2017, this is the term in which department heads are supposed to tell those people, hey, you know, your tenure decision is required by June 15th of next year, and we need you to start preparing materials. If it's not a required tenure, so maybe you've got an untenured faculty member who has credit for prior service that says this would be the year, or I'm sorry, June of 2016-17 would be the year at which a review for tenure would be considered on time if they use their credit, but they're not required to use the credit, so they could actually defer without any penalty and any problem whatsoever. So you don't necessarily have to tell those people they have to come up and start preparing materials, because they don't have to. I think it would be a good idea to have a conversation with them about whether they're planning to use the credit for prior service, whether you, department head, colleagues think it's the right time, or if they might be better served to wait. There could be some discussion about that. And candidates for promotion to full professor, you're never required to come up for promotion to full professor as an associate. And so in this case, this language comes primarily from the CBA, but we're trying to treat all our faculty the same. CBA does not require the department head to tell associate professors who are currently in their 5th year at rank, hey, you need to start preparing your materials now. On the other hand, if the department head thinks it is a good time to do so, it wouldn't be a bad collegial sort of thing to have that conversation, even if the associate professor doesn't directly come and ask and initiate the discussion him or herself. Some of these timelines then become sort of nebulous. During that winter term or on into the spring term, the candidate will have some things that are required to be provided to the department, and I'll run through what those are. One of those things will include a list of suggested reviewers. We'll talk more about that later too. During the spring and on into the summer is when the department then would be, or the college, and of course those units that don't have departments, would be requesting soliciting and receiving the external reviews so that when the fall term comes, one of these is a laser, that one. When fall term comes, the file is ready for everybody to look at. All the pieces are in place, the candidates' contributions, the external letters, and so the committee the personnel committee can get to work and the whole process moves forward. Typically in the fall also there will be a vote by the voting faculty. The department head, if there is one, or the personnel committee, if there isn't head, will prepare a report and recommendation. That report and recommendation will then move as much as possible in the fall term, but this extends into the winter term pretty regularly, to the dean's office. Each of the schools or colleges has an elected personnel committee. It's either called a Dean's Advisory Committee or Faculty Personnel Committee, I think are the two terms that are used, depending which school you're in. They'll prepare a report and vote. The dean will also prepare an independent report and recommendation. That whole file then will come to academic affairs, where we initiate the university level review. This says winter and spring. You know, we don't mind if they come during the fall, and in fact, for some of the professional schools, there is an expectation that we'll receive these files late in the fall. I'll show you those dates in a second. The earlier we get these, the sooner we can get them underway through the elected faculty personnel committee at the university level and on to the provost for a decision. For a number of years now, we've targeted May 1st as the universal time at which we will announce all promotion and tenure decisions, except in cases where we've contractually or in terms of strategic hiring have needed an earlier decision, in which case we can pull that off. So some more detailed decisions. We ask you early on, and actually we've already asked the schools and colleges to give academic affairs an anticipated list of who you think will be coming up for review for promotion and or tenure next year. It's a preliminary list. If we didn't have it, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but it helps us start to plan for the coming year, even as we're still dealing with the angst of the current year. That is revisable, of course. We'll start that by sending you a list of all the people for whom a tenure decision is required. And I think that list will also include then a group of people for whom, given credit for prior service, they could be considered timely for tenure consideration. That'll be one of the ones where there may be a little bit more editing done at the school or college level, where you say, yes, these people were eligible, but these three said that they're going to wait another year. Okay. And then the full professor case, Pam, do we provide a list of associate professors who have been at rank long enough to be considered? I don't think we do. There's so much variability. Speaking of which, I should have introduced some people, like Pam Palaniuk, who I work with at Academic Affairs on the promotion and tenure process. Tammy Orr, who is in Academic Affairs and is responsible for coordinating the event actually occurring, so we wouldn't be here without you. Thank you, Tammy. Gretchen Drew is recording us for posterity, much to my anxiety. And Marianne Highland is a brand new 2 weeks in Assistant Vice Provost in Academic Affairs. I think I got everybody. Okay. November 15th. Okay, now we've got some deadlines here. We call CAS out separately because, as we all know, they are a large unit and expecting the same things and same timelines is probably not going to be meeting with a whole lot of success. So by the 15th, this is different from these other, look, this is departments submitting completed files to the dean by November 15th. I'm not sure how many of the CAS departments are fulfilling that expectation. We're going to, as the numbers of promotion and tenure cases increase with the president's aggressive plan for increasing faculty recruitment, I'm going to be highlighting how many of you are CAS-related departments. Okay, a lot of you, good. So the message is going to need to be clear. The files are going to have to move up as quickly as possible, or at the university level, we're just going to be stuck. With a May 1st deadline, if we get all the CAS files at the last possible moment, it's not going to happen. The Faculty Personnel Committee is going to go on strike, and it's just going to be a mess. Okay, so by November 15th or soon thereafter as possible, the files to the dean. November 30th, only 2 weeks later, but this is excluding CAS, all the others. I don't know if it's appropriate to call everybody else a professional school, but it's easier to do it that way. So the professional schools should have all their cases submitted to academic affairs. Should. I know things happen for various reasons. We do the best we can. If you come in late, we can handle that, but that's what we're aiming at. I'm sorry, these are tenure cases. This is worded differently in earlier documents. It said cases for which a negative decision would lead to terminal notice. And that somehow, at least in my mind, and I think everybody else's minds, to turn into those cases that we think are gonna be negative so that a person loses his or her job. But that's presupposing things. So we want you to send us the cases early that we know we're gonna fire. Somehow that seems wrong in so many fronts, including particularly the presumption that that's going to be the outcome. So as I thought about it, I discussed with all the people that had written this earlier language, it's clear the one certain case where a denial will lead to terminal notice is a tenure case. If you're denied tenure, you get a 1-year contract. Terminal sounds unfriendly. We call it a non-renewable contract, which somehow is not quite as painful, I think. It's a year to get feet underneath oneself and find an alternative, but it is non-renewable. Okay. So those are the ones we ideally parse these out to have those come in early. It's not, absolutely not critical with our current timelines that we're working on things. The distinction between tenure cases and the remaining cases, which would be non-tenure related promotions, really not that important to keep in mind. If this helps you plan your workloads, then stick with those definitions. By March 15th, CAS is expected to have submitted all its cases to academic affairs. And this used to be in red, but red type on this gray background it hurts your eyes, or hurts my eyes at least. So I switched to yellow, but it's just as important as if it were in red. Okay. If CAS waits until March 15th and sends all the files, it doesn't work. So as soon as these files start percolating from the departments to the dean's office needs to be working and not sitting on them, but moving them forward to us. The later in the winter term it gets where we haven't gotten files from any of you, not just CAS, the more emails your dean will get from me. And the more meetings I'll have with Pam because she's getting nervous that we're not seeing enough cases. So save us all that heartache and just make sure things come. What are those things that are becoming? Now let me dive into how we put this dossier together, and I'll follow it pretty much in the order that pieces get added to the dossier. All this information is available online. The slide deck will be online too, so you don't have to frantically copy down lots of words if you don't want to. Added this yesterday when I realized it wasn't in our presentations before, so take note of this. Election of criteria. We're all engaged in review and probable revision, minor or more significant, of our promotion and tenure criteria documents. Technically, we started doing that in the fall of 2014 with a spring of 2015 deadline. Well, it's the winter of 2016. We're still working on these. I think you just got notifications of new deadlines for these, but you're working on criteria. If someone comes up for tenure after working for 5 years under a set of criteria and then the criteria change substantially, one might argue that that person could have been disadvantaged. Could also argue the person's been advantaged. It depends what the changes were, right? But the bottom line is that if criteria change during the period of employment as a pre-tenured faculty member at the University of Oregon, the candidate has the opportunity to decide which set of criteria will apply. Okay? When that choice is made, you should establish that in writing. This probably won't happen all that often. It won't happen for files this year because we still haven't even seen your revised documents, and these people are coming up now, so it's almost certainly at least going to be pretty straightforward. But establish in writing so that sometime later, if things don't go well for the candidate, the claim won't be made, well, you applied the wrong standards, because we'll know which standards the candidate wanted to have applied. For people who have tenure, so promotion to full professor, there's no required timeline for that. Someone could have been an associate professor for 25 years and be ready to come up for promotion to full. During the 25 years, the standards might have evolved from a statement that we expect you to do a good job to something with a little bit more detail than that. No one thinks that we should default to standards that were developed so long ago, and so the CBA for bargaining unit members and we by general agreement for all faculty members, for people with tenure, it's only the preceding 6 years where if there's a criteria change that the candidate has a selection choice. Candidate CV, here's another word you on, but just a little bit of yellow stuff. I highlighted the things that are frequently not done correctly in dossiers, and that's why you're all here. CV should be signed and dated by the candidate. I'd love it if it's actually dated before it went to the external reviewers, so I don't have to write and say it was dated after it was sent to the external reviewers. Is that because you forgot to have it signed and dated, or because it was submitted afterward? Updates are permissible. People have heard me say this many times. Maybe we all much prefer a simple list of updates. Paper 17 that was listed as submitted has now been accepted. Paper 16 that was listed as accepted has now appeared in print. And I had 3 more speaking engagements listed below. That's much preferable to another 30-page CV where everybody reviewing it does the equivalent of playing Where's Waldo, trying to figure out what's different. Okay, and it keeps the file shorter too. Make sure the CV is seen by the external reviewers is there and any updates that are provided. Some candidates, this is a tense, intention-filled process, right? Some candidates submit 3 or 4 or 5 CV updates, and they should all be included. Ideally, they're 1-page updates instead of full things, but either way, they're included. But do make sure that the original CV is there, so when we read an external reviewer's comments, we know what they were commenting on. Format, however you like. We'd like very much, I still don't see a lot of this really, the graduation dates, not because we're age discriminating, but because we're trying to know when you were at UC Berkeley as a student, so that if we write to a professor at UC Berkeley, it probably wasn't your professor, okay, or your candidates. And the mentors' names. People are driven by various motivations. One of mine is I don't like to be embarrassed. And it is considered a lifetime conflict of interest between a mentor and a mentee in terms of letters of reference. If someone was your faculty member's PhD advisor, you shouldn't ask that person to write a letter of recommendation. If you have an older candidate who might have had a student who's a faculty member somewhere else, you shouldn't ask that person either. And I'm embarrassed if I write to someone and they say, well, I'd be happy to do it, but I was the PhD mentor because I should have known that. Well, how should I have known that? There's no way I would know that unless the person tells me. So try to get them to do that. Make sure to include a section in the CV for work in progress. People worry about this a lot. It's not done. Do I get to count it? Will people think I'm trying to pad my resume and so on? One of the most critical things that happens in a promotion and tenure review is a judgment by these various review groups of your potential, of the faculty member's potential for moving forward. So this section on work in progress is absolutely essential. Now, it shouldn't be every idea that the faculty member is thinking about. I might like to write a paper on this one day, but work that's underway, research has begun, a student's working on it with the faculty member, whatever it might be, a draft is in preparation. Give the reviewers a clear sense of where things are going. A book is the currency of the realm in some departments. Those departments, I think, will be reevaluating how they describe the book and the role it plays as scholarship, and a record of scholarship for promotion and tenure cases through this year as we work on the revised policies. The university views a book as completed as when it's completed. The manuscript is done. It is under signed contract with a publisher, and it's either in print or in press or close enough to that with no further content input from the author that it will be a book. If it hasn't reached that point, the manuscript's done. I've completed it, it's beautiful, but there's no publisher. Well, we're gonna all hope for the best, but at this point we can't know that that book will be published. If there's a signed contract with a publisher and the manuscript's not done, again, we have every expectation it will be done, but it's not done now. If the faculty member says, cool, I got my manuscript, or I got my contract, I got my advance, and I'm just not going to really ever write that last couple chapters, then it's not done. So the book is done when it's done. If it's not done, it can still be viewed as a work in progress, helping us understand what the future looks like, but it doesn't count as a completed piece of scholarship. The statement, again, signed and dated. Updates are permissible. Less common for the statement, though occasionally we see them. If there is an update provided, again, we should see the statement as provided to the external reviewers as well as any updates that were there. I've highlighted future plans for the same reasons as I did for the CV. This is, for many reviewers, the most important part of the statement. Statement regarding contributions to institutional equity and conclusion. That was a new invention under the CBA. I happen to love it. I would have loved it even more if we had that requirement before we negotiated for it in a collective bargaining agreement, because it's a great idea. The University of Oregon has actually made gained national attention for the fact that we expect our faculty to comment on this issue. It's an integral part of promotion and tenure. There is still some confusion about that. I think I've got another slide about it, but we also have a number of materials available online talking about what that statement might be. For some faculty, I'll just be very quick about it. Some faculty, it's hard for them to answer that because it is fundamental to who they are and what they do. Their scholarship is about, I always try to come up with new ideas for them, and I'm not going to think about it. Indigenous rights in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, it's intrinsically about equity and inclusion. Their teaching is about the same sorts of issues. Their service, they go into the community and they do these sorts of things. What do I say about what I do? Because it is what I do. The other extreme, maybe it's an astrophysicist who works in a dark laboratory in the basement and see what does an astrophysicist do about equity and inclusion. Here it's a chance for them to think more broadly about what it is they do or what it is they could do. Okay? And intermediate, there are people to whom their research maybe doesn't really directly apply. They will say something like, I treat all students equitably and fairly, and my somewhat facetious but not completely response is, I'm glad to hear you don't break the law, but let's go beyond that a little bit. And then some people will do additional activities, the science outreach programs, science literacy programs, things like that, where they intentionally find a way to address equity and inclusion, even though they don't really see how their research directly impacts that. Unusual things. I encourage candidates to think about how someone might read their record, recognize that it's intrinsic to evaluation files to look for the flaws. I think we all do that. I collect crystals, and I may have a beautiful crystal that anybody else says is beautiful, and I'll say, yeah, but that one corner's got a little ding on it, and all I can see is that flaw. It's what reviewers do. So what are the flaws in your faculty member's case? Is there a 4-year gap in funding? Or not funding, well, maybe funding. In publications? Is there a reason for that? Probably. Is there a reason for that would lead people to conclude it wasn't someone who had kicked back for 4 years and then got nervous about getting tenure and decided to publish something? Probably. Maybe it's nobody's business, and the candidate needs to decide whether he or she wants to explain the details about, I was in clinical depression and under medical treatment for 2 years and I couldn't write. Or they say, I don't need to tell people that. That's none of their business. And they need to think about whether there's something in their file that might be helped by having an explanation there for the reviewers. Candidates need to provide a statement of waiver. This has to be done before you request external reviews. Remember the embarrassment motivation. It's pretty embarrassing to send a letter to an external reviewer and they send a nice detailed review report back thinking it's anonymous and confidential. And then you talk to the candidate, say, hey, we forgot to have you sign a waiver. And the waiver statement the candidate signs says, I'm going to retain full access to my file. then you have to write back to that reviewer and say, we screwed up. That to me is embarrassing. So say, in fact, the candidate may, on request, see your letter. Do you want to revise your letter? Do you want to withdraw your letter because you don't write to these cases, or are you okay with it the way it is? You don't want to do that.
Do we include the statement of waiver in the materials we send out to the external reviewer?
We don't send the actual signed letter, but your request to the reviewers, for which we have templates available, does establish what the waiver status is.
Okay.
There's 3 choices. The one I mentioned where the candidate says, I get to see the whole file. There's the opposite of that where the candidate says, I don't want to see any of the file. And a third one that we see occasionally is the most common partial waiver. It can be anything the candidate wants in the end, but the most common one is that I don't want to see the external reviewers. I understand why those should be confidential, but if there are internal reports written, I want to have the opportunity to see those. Okay? And that choice is made without duress. You'd simply present the candidate with the 3 choices. You could actually present them with 3 printed letters if you want and have them sign the one they want.
I saw on an earlier slide that the balloting is signed secret ballots. So does this not apply to the ballots?
You know, there's ambiguity about all this. I typically am the one that will redact a file before it's released to a candidate. That usually is a case, I've had an occasional case where someone who is successful still wanted to see the file, and I understand there's actually some really nice reasons for doing that. Generally, it's a case where, well, it's more commonly when someone's been denied and they're getting ready for an appeal. But in those cases where the candidate's they're gonna be here, but they want to see the file, I err on the side of redacting the names of the committees if there was disagreement. If the college personnel, or let me put it to the department, in the departmental committee, if there was a 3-2 vote, I will redact that report so that you can't see the names of the people that voted. If it was unanimous, the identity of the personnel committee is not a secret, and if they all voted no or they all voted yes, there's no point in hiding their votes. But if it was split, then I will hide them so that the person who's asked to see this file is going to live with these people, and I don't want any faculty, I certainly want it for myself, to walk down the hall and see Professor X who thought I should get to stay, and then I see Professor Y who thought I should go. It's not a good collegial environment. So I will committee reports, I'll redact the names unless there's no point in redacting. The department head's report, you know, we know who the department head was, and so I can't hide that identity.
We have individual faculty ballots. I guess that's what I was talking about. Are those covered?
Yes, so in a confidential vote, those are supposed to be retained for some period of time, which is also not well identified. But those are not ever revealed. The individual votes of the faculty in the department.
So if they have retained all their rights, they still may not see.
The individual faculty votes are not part of the personnel file. They're maintained separately by the department head. So they are not part of a file that's to be released.
Okay.
Okay. If questions come in about wanting to see a file, the simplest thing to do is to ask me. I've been doing redactions and releases for 8 years now, and I've gotten pretty good at it. Okay, I think I already talked through these other things. The waiver statements are also available on the website. Statement of duties and responsibilities. If those that have prepared these files recognize these are the headings for the tabs in the traditional documents or in the electronic version of them as well. This one is sometimes has been confusing to people. It's meant to be an objective, factual statement about what this person's expected to do. Sometimes it's as simple as to say they're expected to do what's expected of a faculty member in this department. The departments are all working on professional responsibility, otherwise known as workload policies now. The NTTF ones are in, we're reviewing them, we'll have them back to you soon. The TTF ones are are still in progress. But so those will exist, and I think at some point pretty soon we'll be reconsidering what this statement of duties looks like, because every department will have a clear one. Increasingly common, we're seeing a copy of the position description, especially in schools and colleges and departments that have organized record keepers like all of you, and you can actually find the position description from however many years ago that person was hired. It's not a very critical part of the file, to be honest with you. Conditions of appointment, also somewhat confusing. I can try to simplify it for you. If it's a tenure case, we want to see the most recent contract for the candidate. I've only seen the wrong one in once or twice, but check to make sure you provided the right contract. If it's promotion to full professor, there's nothing required in this section unless some of these other things show up. And this is the place where maybe you've got a faculty member who's got a dual appointment to departments. So here would be a letter, in this section you'd include a letter explaining how that person's case is going to be handled. When we hire someone to a split appointment, or when someone moves into a split appointment, the deans are expected to develop, or department is expected to develop, a written document that explains to the candidate and the units involved how their tenure review is going to happen. Typically, there is one department identified as a tenure home. They'll take care of the primary responsibilities, and the other department will provide, they'll meet and discuss and provide a report and recommendation to the home department. Here also you could put things in if the clock was extended for FMLA or other leaves, for example. Teaching evaluation section, not sure why I put some in quotes and some not. This is the most complicated section. It's got a lot of pieces. I've got a lot of slides about it, which I won't say a whole lot about. And this is, I guess this is more guidance for department heads. Maybe I shouldn't have even left this in, but as your faculty are moving up through the ranks, it's helpful for them to receive from department heads or deans some guidance as to their teaching responsibilities, and committees in particular like to see experience in a variety of settings. Curriculum development, this will be something that appears in professional responsibilities policies in part. How much of that do you expect? But maybe less for the assistant professor, more for an associate professor. That's a departmental discussion and judgment. Student supervision and things like that as well. I did highlight here the not infrequent case, maybe growing in frequency these days, if we hire someone from another institution. What do we have to help us evaluate their teaching? When you do that hire, if you can get as much as possible, when you ask for documentation early in the process, or maybe not so much, but once you've selected a candidate, get them to give you what they have about their teaching. They've been tenured somewhere else, and you're hiring them after an international search. So they're almost certainly going to look very tenurable. But the committees get really frustrated because we value teaching here. If they get to the teaching section and there's a one-page thing that says, because Professor X is not taught at University of Oregon, we don't have any information about their teaching. Then they have to make a judgment based on no information other than your word that you think this person will be a good teacher. So try to get what you can. The one thing we won't do is ask the institution we just poached this person from to give us some information about their teaching. I know what I would say to someone and ask me to do that for someone they stole from me. And say, you just stole them. You already made a decision. I don't really feel like helping you. Make up your own mind. Okay, so that's what I mean here. Not everything will be available. Not everything will look anything like the way we do teaching evaluations, but get what you can. Help the committees understand that you've hired someone who's not only a world-class researcher, but going to be a world-class teacher as well. Department has a lot of things to add to this. I think all of this, or virtually all of this, comes digitally now from the registrar, from the course evaluation system, and so on. And it's one of what I think is a delightful consequence of going to a digital file, is that you don't get these digital files, print them out, put them in a folder that you send to us so we can scan it so our committees can look at it digitally. So we're saving a lot of time and effort. So the list of courses taught, the summary table comes from the registrar with the quantitative evaluations. Sample evaluation forms, it's mostly the non-CAS schools, I think, that have different questions the summary table, honestly, with the 7 standard criteria, pretty much establishes what the questions are. The quantitative summary sheets, these are in the primary file. This is, maybe I should have highlighted this, although it hasn't been too bad this year. The student comments don't go in the primary file. Those, we don't, and what's the difference between primary and secondary or supplementary file? The supplementary file we send back to the dean and then to the candidate. We don't retain it. The primary file we keep for state record retention law, which we used to think was forever, and I think we figured out is actually 7 years, which by some people's standards is forever in a university. But so we don't want the written comments in the archival copy. It's not something we're supposed to archive. We don't want them. Okay, so peel them out, and that's sometimes, depending on the report you get, going to be kind of complicated. I don't want you to spend a lot of time dissecting things. But in the primary file, you take that document, that digital document that provides all the evaluations, make a copy of it, put the entire thing in a supplementary file. Then in the primary file, delete all the pages that are written comments. Okay, you don't need to try to separate them out and sort. And I've already put this in the primary file, so I don't want it in the secondary file. It's okay for it to be duplicated in the supplementary file.
Supposed to be in reverse chronological order, and when I go on the evaluations page, it gives it to me to choose in chronological order, but when it gives me the final thing, they're not.
It's numerical.
And
It makes me crazy too.
I spend a lot of time moving things around.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One is don't. Maybe that's the simplest. A second is send me a note so that I'm reminded finally to talk with the folks who do this to see if they could. I think there's something relatively simple you could do to get them chronological instead of numerical. And then the final thing I'll say is it probably doesn't really matter because the summary table, you know, if you're reviewing a whole bunch of files, you probably spend most of your time looking at the summary table. I do that. I look for patterns. And basically, I look down the course, the instructor quality versus departmental average, and if it's all above average, I think, well, I don't need to spend a lot of time here. And if it's all above average and there's one that's a 1.0 versus a 4.5 average, I say, you know, that one's odd. I might almost want to look at that one. And I'll spend some time. But it's not worth your time trying to organize them chronologically. Okay, supplementary. Peer evaluations. At the point you're putting these files together, it's almost too late to do anything about the fact that the department heads didn't do their jobs, but not quite. Senate legislation since I think 1999 is required for pre-tenure faculty an evaluation in each of the 3 years leading up to the year of the tenure review. So that would be years 3, 4, and 5. So it's now the spring of year 5 and you realize that there are no peer evaluations of teaching. You can't go back in time. But you can at least try to get a couple into the file before it's submitted to the dean. Okay, so if it's winter or spring and you realize there aren't any, we'll try to get one that winter or spring and maybe one again the next fall. Don't go crazy. Don't get 3 from the one term or 2 from the same class from 2 different people, because it's, you know, honestly, I think the university is going to be engaging in discussions of peer evaluation and how to make it more meaningful. I know one way to make it less meaningful is to get a pro forma one late in the process because you realized you didn't have enough peer reviews of teaching. So don't go crazy. Try to keep up with things. It's been legislation for so long now that really there shouldn't be problems. By the time I see there aren't sufficient peer evaluations of teaching, I'll tell you we're not going to arrange an extension of the tenure clock for this poor assistant professor because the department head didn't get enough peer evaluations of teaching. So the file is going to go forward with what we have, but please help us have it go forward with what it should have. And you don't need to go crazy on these either. I've been seeing files, tenured associate professors are just required to have 1 peer evaluation every other year. So they got tenure. There may only be 2 peer evaluations, because in the 6th year, so they get 2nd year, the 4th year, and the 6th year is the year they're being considered for promotion. Okay, I've seen some for promotion to full where there's 2 a year every year for 6 years, and save your faculty some time. You know, if it's someone who really needs that input, sure, do what you can to help your faculty, but don't overly burn out your faculty on doing peer evaluations if you don't really need that many. Okay. The candidate needs to provide some things to the teaching section. List of teaching awards, if any, usually in the CV, can just be copied from there. The list of supervised students. I think sometimes departments are preparing this, but certainly the candidate ought to at least review it. And it's nice if they can be sorted. So undergraduates separate from graduates, masters separate from doctoral. And in particular also it's nice if the role of the faculty member can be identified. You know, being a committee member is important, but it's different from being an advisor or being a chair. So identifying the role for each of the students is very, very helpful. A teaching portfolio is provided by the candidate. If the candidate desires, I'll come back and talk about that desire in a couple minutes. It goes in the supplementary file, so we don't keep it. It's not exhaustive. It's meant to be a sample of things that the faculty member is particularly proud of. Maybe an innovative course that was developed, a particularly cool midterm or class project or something, or some assessment activity, whatever it might be, things that would really highlight innovation rather than just showing, yes, I taught 6 classes a year for 6 years.
Okay.
Yes?
The list of teaching awards and the list of supervised students, if that's already in the CV, does it need to be separated out?
It's, you know, we ask for it in the teaching section. I don't like unnecessary repetition, but maybe you could simply put a note saying, see page 17 of the CV or something like that.
Okay.
Or if it's easier just to digital pages, it's not that hard to make a copy and stick it in either, I guess. Letters from students are placed at the end of the teaching evaluation section. They're considered to be evaluations of teaching because in general, students aren't going to appraise their mentor's service contributions, and although they may be doing research in that faculty member's laboratory or under their guidance, they're not really in general tuned into the expectations for scholarship at an AAU Research One university. And so student letters, when they're received, whether solicited or unsolicited, are placed in the teaching section if they're signed and dated. Otherwise, you don't include them. They're not required. Some departments, as a matter of course, put out a call for student letters. I'll tell you that's a matter for the faculty's determination. When it comes to review committees, I don't know that I've ever seen a case, I suppose, never say never. It's very rare when comments from students play any substantial role in the considerations of those committees. So if a faculty member is very concerned about whether they're going to make it or not, and they decide to have 50 students write letters in support, that if it's helpful to their psyche, I guess it's okay, but it probably doesn't really help the case. I say that to you all because you are in the position of giving guidance to your junior faculty members, and more often than not, I think I see the extreme angst in people who really are just fine, and you can help settle them down. Supplementary file, I've already talked about a fair bit. In particular, that's where the signed student comments come, and I think when you get these from the registrar, you get only the ones that have students' names. The faculty member has access to all of them, whether they're signed or not. If somehow the department head or the department committee gets hold of unsigned ones, note that it's actually technically illegal to quote from those in an evaluation, but you shouldn't be seeing them at all. The scholarship portfolio, everybody's going to have that. That's the material you're going to send to the external reviewers that establishes what your faculty member has accomplished in the area of scholarship or creative practice. We're good at this university in defining broadly what scholarship is. If you're an architect, it might not be published papers. It might be constructed buildings. If you're an artist, it might be installations down the hall or at the Louvre or somewhere else, okay? But that's portfolio expected. A teaching portfolio, the CBA says that a file typically includes a teaching portfolio, it typically includes a service portfolio, And it can include evidence of contributions to equity inclusion. That's beyond the statement about those contributions that goes in the primary file. Typically includes doesn't say it has to be there. So if your faculty candidate doesn't provide a teaching portfolio or service or this additional evidence, I think it's important for you to tell them that they are afforded the opportunity to do so. And there's guidance available what these things might contain. They're not required to. For me, if I know someone is going to be evaluating me and my job depends on it, I'm going to provide everything I can to help them decide that they ought to let me keep my job.
If somebody should not want to provide that stuff, should we, when we're assembling the file, put a note in there that they are not wanting to put anything in this section? Because we were asked, once we sent it on, to supply this stuff.
You know, it's an interesting question. Should you include a note saying the faculty member was invited but chose not to? I'm sort of torn, to be honest, and this is just personal opinions maybe here now. Part of me says, yes, you should do that so nobody will question then about whether they're asked or not. On the other hand, I think, does putting that statement in make it sound like you disapprove and so you're not really as supportive as you are? So I guess there's no requirement one way or the other. I believe that if we provide our faculty with full information about how promotion and tenure works, and we do, the CBA is very clear, the academic affairs policies I think are equally clear, or at least we're getting there. You all know we're engaged in pretty wholesale revision of lots of things. There's some level of personal responsibility. You know, they're expected to include a statement about equity and inclusion. If they don't, I don't send the file back to the dean and then department head and candidate to write the comment. Some deans have been doing so, and I think it's a good idea for them to invite the person to do so. But if in the end they choose not to, well, you know, I can tell you the FPC evaluates that statement, and if it's not there, they comment, you know, they didn't provide a statement of equity and inclusion. And they just make a recommendation rather than a decision, but they have a choice of a strong yes, a weak yes, or a no recommendation. And each member votes individually, so there's no expectation of a unanimous vote in any one way from the FPC. FPC members might well decide, you know, I thought this was a superb file, but the candidate paid no attention to this, so instead of a strong yes, I'm doing a yes. Instead of a yes, it might be a weak yes. I don't think we're to the case yet. Just gets more, I don't know, I'll say it. I don't think we're to the case yet where the provost would deny tenure to someone because they didn't put in a statement about their equity and inclusion contributions. Could we get there someday? Probably. I do think the provost will say no to someone I know the provost will say no to a candidate who has deficient scholarship portfolio. I'm reasonably confident the provost would say no to a candidate who was clearly deficient in the area of teaching. The service contributions, equity inclusion contributions, those are always these kind of fuzzy ones where you say, would you turn away a rock star teacher and researcher because she didn't serve on departmental committees? You know, we would look for opportunities to enhance that performance, but we probably wouldn't say no. Rachel.
Usually, my understanding was that there's a statement about equity inclusion in the narrative, in the candidate's narrative. So
Yes.
would that be reproduced and put here as well?
No, this is really meant to be evidence for that. So the statement is you know, I do research in this area, and I mean, in my teaching, we regularly introduce these sorts of topics. This would, I don't know if I've seen any portfolios addressing this since the opportunity became available, honestly, but it might be things like a letter from the NAACP thanking you for your contributions at a workshop, or from the science literacy program for giving special lectures. It's kind of the same vein as in the service portfolio, which for me is, I would harvest from my drawer of things that I get that make me feel good about myself. I keep a drawer like this. If someone sends me a nice note to thank me for something, it goes in the pile. If I'm having a bad day, I'll pull it out and say, well, somebody likes me. Okay, so this really the same sort of idea, except with the institutional equity and inclusion focus. Okay. Again, I don't know that I've actually seen anybody provide anything beyond the statement in the primary file in that regard. Good. Did you have a question too?
I did. When you said there a strong yes or soft yes, what are the consequences? I mean, I thought it was pretty black and white.
Most of the cases are very black and white.
But what would be the difference? What would be the difference for the candidate between a soft yes and a hard?
No difference unless the softness led to the provost to say no instead of yes. But it's the important thing that we do our level best. It's one of the reasons that I'm happy when people who are successful don't actually ask to see the full file, because if the provost says, congratulations, you're tenured, we hope you'll stay here forever, that's a black and white thing. If you're offered tenure or you're promoted to full professor, we think you're awesome. We want you to spend your career here. We'll be happy to have you as a colleague. If we say no, we're sorry. It's not working. We don't want there to be a group of people who feel that they got tenure but they got lucky because the provost was feeling lenient that day. It's a binary. You're great or we're sorry. It's not, yeah, you're okay, I guess. I've been referring to Pat Paulson's facetious presidential campaigns from long enough ago that most people don't remember, but my favorite slogan from him was, sure, why not? We don't want anybody to think they were a sure why not tenure case here. So the provost gets this, I think about, this is probably an inopportune comparison, but I think about, well, let's at least do archery instead of what I was about to say. You shoot 10 arrows at a target and somebody nails 10 through the bullseye. Somebody else gets a bullseye and a bunch around the periphery, and those patterns are actually very informative about the overall opinion of the committee. So the provost and these patterns of votes are very helpful. Everybody gets a strong yes. We'll talk about that person long enough to make sure we all really appreciate having that colleague here at the university. They're all weak yeses. There's going to be a lot more discussion. They're all no's. Well, you're still going to discuss because it's sometimes possible for everybody to get the wrong opinion. And then if there's a strong yes and 5 yeses and a couple weak yeses and a no, those are the really interesting ones. Where does this range of opinion come from? So it really does shape the discussion and in the end the decision. But as far as the candidate knows, the FBC vote is not released even in a fully open file. That's another one of those documents like the departmental vote that's separate. The candidate knows that he or she got tenure or promoted or not. Evaluation section, I highlighted some things that I used to actually make deans correct, and then I decided that there's only so much you can do before people start to hate you. The candidate does not select external reviewers. The candidate only suggests external reviewers. The department or the dean is the source of the selection. So I would send it back saying you have to reword this page because you said the candidate selected these reviewers and she didn't. Department will create an independent list. Make sure it's independent so then you're absolutely comfortable when it comes to this next thing. If the two of you, the department group, whoever it might be coming up with reviewers, and the candidate find the same person, that person does not count as having been suggested by the candidate. It's a good thing if your faculty member gets carried away and suggests every known professional in his or her field in the world, and then if you can't, you're expected to use mostly people that aren't on that person, on the candidate's list, and they just picked everybody. So you're going to have to pick more people who aren't on that list, and by definition, they won't be very qualified to review the candidate because the candidate picked them all already. So that's not a problem because you generate the list independently, and only the ones you use from the candidate's list that weren't on your independent list are categorized as suggested by the candidate in the file. We do want a clear majority of untainted reviewers. I said be proactive and reactive. You send to 4 of yours and 4 of the candidates knowing people will turn you down, and they do. All 4 of yours turn you down and none of the candidates turn you down. Now you've got 4 letters suggested by the candidate. Don't send that file forward. That happened during the summer, early fall. You still have time to say, you know what, that doesn't exactly look like a clear majority of untainted reviewers. We better get some more letters. If you wait until the file gets to me in February, for me to say, you know, you've got to get some more letters, how are we going to do that in time? It's a very awkward situation. So recognize from the front, you know, it's okay, you know people are going to turn you down, but be wise in terms of how many you ask and when you ask and so on, okay? Make sure that there are more letters that weren't on the candidates list than were.
In the past, the number was always 6. Has that changed?
The minimum is 5 substantive letters. 5 sometimes feels kind of light to me, but it's the minimum requirement. 6 is common. Some fields, chemistry used to go right to like 10 or 12, and they would always write to the doctoral mentor and postdoctoral mentor, which are clear conflicts of interest, and we're fixing details like that. But 5 substantive ones. Some fields, you know, they're publishable works of scholarship, I think. They write detailed book reviews that go on for 5 or 6 pages. You know, 5 of those is generally ample. 5 in mathematics, where they'll write about a paragraph, kind of feels light.
In the template letters, does it clarify that we're only asking for external review of scholarship and/or creative production?
Yes.
Because in the past, I've had external reviewers send letters in that speculate on teaching
Yeah,
or
there are, it's in part a culture within a department or a college. There are some units that do send more material to their external reviewers. We actually need to look at the CBA to see if they should be doing that. I think it says what you have to send, and it doesn't necessarily say that's all you can send. So if there's a culture of doing that, it's okay. It's kind of silly because the typical response is, I don't really know enough to evaluate your teaching or service, so I'll focus on research. So the templates focus on the scholarship. And if you haven't looked, here's another good observation, if you haven't looked at the site recently, we did update the letters. One of the most controversial questions is, would Professor X get tenure at your school? And the most typical response is, that's a stupid question, because Oregon's not my school. I'm at Harvard, we haven't tenured somebody in chemistry in 30 years. So no. But we're stupid, we should. This is someone who we should be smart to give tenure, but we don't. But of course you should give tenure there. It's kind of a strange thing. It sometimes, I think, leads people to be required to publicly state whether they think we're a better school than they are or a worse school. And I don't really like having to read that. So in the latest template, I worked with a group and came up with what I think is pretty good language. And it recognizes your question, which is the fact that research is only one component, but it's typically the only thing we ask them about. And it avoids this comparison things. But the question, I think, says, would Professor X's record of scholarship be supportive of a positive recommendation of tenure at your institution? And then they don't have to explain that we don't know about teaching and service, and I think it's better. So try to use the new letter. Okay, and as we noted, templates are available. Okay, later in the slides I start to be repetitive, so I can move up a little more quickly. I think we've already identified reviewers have to know in advance about the waiver status. If you get, it's rare, but occasionally you'll get unsolicited letters, maybe more often from internal people than external, then we're required to include them in the file. I really hate unsolicited internal letters, and especially if they come from departmental colleagues, because it's pretty clear what is happening there. There's a departmental discussion. That discussion's captured in a summary report. This professor decides that he or she disagrees with that and is going to write an independent letter. And those are awkward letters and usually indicate departmental politics more than anything more substantive. But whatever's received has to be included. That includes external letters. If you wrote to someone and they write back with a detailed letter and then say, by the way, I was the doctoral mentor, or this is my wife, or something like that, that's clearly disqualifying, you still include the letter, but then you make it clear in any report thereafter that you ignored that letter because it was inappropriate. When people decline to review, this generally happens, you send an initial inquiry saying, would you be available to review? If so, we'll send you more information. And people write back saying, no, I've already taken my quota, or I'm too busy, or whatever they write. Usually it's I'm too busy. Frequently it's Professor X is great, I'd love to help out, but I can't. I've never seen one that says, I hate that person's guts, there's no way I'd write a letter for you. Whatever they write, if it's a phone call, then you could make notes and include it, but if they send you an email, then that email should be included in the file at the end, the very end of the evaluation section. And if it's not, I'll write to you and ask you to provide copies. So save us all some work.
So the template letter is what goes with the materials. The initial inquiry can be an email with maybe CV.
Yes, and actually increasingly it's all electronic now. So we've got templates for the initial inquiry, for the full inquiry,
Okay.
and even for an acknowledgement if you want. Typically the initial inquiry is would you be available, and it's not uncommon to include a CV so they can make some first judgment as to how easy or difficult it's going to be, I suppose. There's a checklist. Make sure that you list all the reviewers requested and received there, unsolicited, after solicited. Letters from students, I already said, don't go in the evaluation section, but in the teaching section. I know we're running, it's 10 after 1. If you have places to go, I can talk for a couple more hours, but we're scheduled till 2. There's probably more food if you're getting hungry. If you need to leave, I understand, don't worry. Okay. Materials sent to reviewers. This is a sheet that goes in the reviewers section or the evaluations tab. You're expected to send a statement, the vita, this really should say the scholarship portfolio, I think. I'll update that before the next time I give this talk, for the period under review. If it's a promotion to full professor and it's in the standard 6-year time frame, don't send them stuff that was published and recognized in the awarding of tenure. There are some departments that like to say the promotion to full is a holistic view of the entire thing, and I guess they will establish that in their P&T criteria statements, and we'll either accept that or not. But in general, we just want to see the stuff since the last review. A tenure case is the work they did here if it's a normal time frame tenure review here. If they had credit for prior service, then we'll look at some of the work from the previous service. If they had credit for prior service but they didn't use it, then we focus on the work done here. Work in progress, that's fine to include and should be listed here. And we expect the promotion tenure criteria document to be sent to the reviewers. We can't make them read it, but at least we can try to get them to understand that we expect them to evaluate the candidate according to the things we told the candidate they would be evaluated by. Everybody's got their own approach to how to do these files, and again, we can't force them, but that gives them context.
For the case of going up to full professor, if it's been, say, 10 years, is that a period of review including doing the evaluation from that whole tenure period?
So that's right. So an associate professor maybe has been associate for longer than a 6-year period. So yes, the scholarship since the last promotion is what we expect. We do place a particular window on the 6-year period of time. I have in my mind this little sliding scale. It looks like an old slide rule, I guess, where the 6-year window leading up to the decision is the primary focus, but we're aware of the other material as well. It plays less of it's not ignored, but it's less of a central role than in the immediate 6 years. The teaching evaluations, state record retention law says that those are destroyed after, I think it's 5 years. And Professor X has been associate professor for 20 years, and you've got all those records. You can provide them. It starts to be pretty bulky. For a while, we had this nice opportunity. The electronic system went online in 2008, I think, full time. And a 6-year window from that, everything was the digital form, and we didn't have to worry about the older ones, unless you'd been a professor longer and people were providing those. Or I made it too complicated. The electronic system, unless we ask them to do otherwise, is only, in the summary report, it only gives you the last 5 or 6 years. I've forgotten which it is. So it's now ignoring even some digitally available years, unless we tell them give us more. I think that's fine, because we had a associate professor for 25 years. It came in and the file was still printed. It was this thick with teaching evaluations. How much do you need? You know, this one, I think the last 5 to 6 years is a really important thing. If they got tenured in 1792 and their teaching wasn't very good, but the last 5 or 6 years it's been great, who cares about the ancient history? So I think you can simplify your files and include only that past 6 years.
Following on that question, and that's the student evaluations, what about the peer evaluations?
Peer evaluations, you know, the Senate.
They exist, but
Yeah.
essentially they could.
Yeah, that's right. If they in fact existed and it were a problem. I'd say, you know, Senate legislation says every 2 years for an associate professor. So include what you've got. But don't stress if you don't have them for the first 20 years of the associate professorship.
You have an assistant professor who has multiple children and delayed their clock. Do you still go back to the day that they were hired? Sort of the delayed clock thing is kind of weird in thinking about that.
Yeah. In general, a delayed clock means actually we have suggested language on the templates, even to the external reviewers, because it's always been a thing that gets people most confused and comes up with problematic different interpretations. Most generally, a year off the clock, whether it's childbirth or medical leave or whatever it is a year that doesn't exist. So it's 7 years since we hired this person, or 8 years since we hired them, and now it's the tenure decision coming up. Well, I don't know, you know, there's 17 papers, but it's over 8 years. No, it's over 6 years. Okay, we exclude those times from the periods of expectation.
Yeah, but they're still probably teaching classes, so they have class evaluations over that time, and maybe during that year that it was delayed was when they did 4 published works. So
Yeah.
I mean,
It's-
not
it's-
really, we're allowing the work, we're just pretending it happened in a condensed
I-
time frame, right?
I hear you, and I don't know that I can give a single general, completely appropriate answer, but I would say most generally, it is safest to ignore that year. If they were given a year off, you can't assume that, yeah, you had a year off, but we know you were working on that book. We'll end up getting into, I think, philosophical trouble, if nothing else, if we start making assumptions about what they might have done during a period of time when we weren't paying them to do anything.
So, where a person isn't taking the time off, say it's not the person that is the primary care provider, yet they still get the delayed year. They're still teaching, we're paying them, they're here.
Yeah.
But they have an extension to when they have to go for tenure. So just not, because I agree with the philosophical conversation around that, but just talking about class evaluations, if the registrar system is going on for 5 years, but they actually have 7 or 8 years where they've been in the assistant role, to bring all of those evaluations over? Or do you do both?
You must know of an actual case of this. I certainly haven't seen it very often. I just include it if it's convenient to do so. There's actually some ambiguity. The CBA says include all the teaching evaluations since the last evaluation, or the last promotion. The state says you don't get to keep these things for more than 5 years. So, you know, and reality to me, as someone who's reviewed hundreds of promotion and tenure cases, is too much information isn't necessarily helpful. So I think there's a practical interpretation that can be consistent with state law, not inconsistent with the CBA, and make sense for everybody. You reminded me, you were talking about medical leave. Or parental leave in particular. Routinely granted, it's not a request, it's a notification that the faculty member is going to take a year of parental leave. It's always in 1 year increments because we only have one promotion and tenure cycle. We can't accommodate you taking 6 months and then starting the clock again because we don't have a cycle that works on that pace. So it's 1 year. It has to be declared with a certain period of time of the event, the adoption or the birth of the child. But then when it comes time. So I'm in my third year pre-tenure, I have a child, I say, I gotta delay the clock, I haven't slept in 3 weeks. And then 2 years later, I say, you know, I'm kicking butt. And my book came out, I've got 17 publications, I'm traveling around the world, I don't wanna wait. You don't have to. So you're granted the opportunity to extend the clock, but if you say, never mind, you're still considered an on-time review, not an early review. Biographical sketches. This is, you don't want to spend a lot of time on this stuff, but we want you to pay attention. Short is key. I stole this one from Russ Tomlin years ago, Noam Chomsky. Title, institution. You don't have to say a lot. You don't have to say a lot even if it's somebody we don't know. It's somebody you know, but establish just very briefly the significance of this person. Here's the two most important pieces, well, in addition to telling us where they are and who they are, is establishing a relationship. No known relationship's the most common thing. Oftentimes people write this before they request letters, and then a letter comes back and says, I've been a close drinking buddy of Professor X for 35 years, but I think I could write an unbiased review. Gustavus says, no known relationship. Well, you know what? You have a known relationship now. And you had that because it was in the letter before you sent the case to me. So should I have to send it back saying, could you please update the statement? So if you learn about a relationship, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you didn't know, but now you do, so update your statement. And if it turns out that everybody you wrote to was a close drinking buddy or mentor of the candidate, then remember the proactive, reactive part, get more letters. Okay. Don't hope we won't notice it. But so this is really important to establish a relationship. Most common thing is they've been on panels together, they've met at professional workshops, went out to dinner. Of course they have. We want our faculty to be world famous. If they're world famous, it means they're traveling the world or people are reading their work and they're going to know each other through that way. That is absolutely fine. Disqualifying relationships are things like spouse, co-publisher, co-author within the past 5 years. That's a good enough time frame for the federal government and federal grants, so I figured it ought to be good enough for us. They published a paper together 15 years ago. Great, it's not a problem. It's not a conflict. Published paper together last year, yeah, that's not so good. Okay, but we need to know, and whether it was one that was just on the department's list, just on the candidates list, in which case it's candidate suggested, or if it was one on just your list or on both lists, in which case it's department selected. These are going to mostly be things for you to look at later. The next thing that goes into the file is a departmental committee recommendation. It's a full analysis of the case. I really don't want to talk about any of this because it's starting to be late, I think. But your faculty, if they need help in knowing how to evaluate a file, ask me. And I've got some guidance documents that are available on the web, guidance documents to help committees think about what this sort of evaluation might look like. This is why I didn't want to talk about it. It's really long, okay? But nothing that would be surprising to faculty who are evaluating a colleague's work. Signed by all members of the committee. Not all committees do a vote, although they'll typically put it forward with a recommendation, and frequently that'll say that they're unanimously in favor. This is one of those things, again, where if a file were released and the review committees, they've identified themselves, of course, the committee, if they had a split opinion about it, I would redact who had what opinion. Department heads evaluation. Again, I've got guidance document on this. You want more information. It's meant to be independent, but at the same time, I don't want people to spend 10 pages repeating everything that a departmental committee just said. So look for the unique things you can add while providing your independent appraisal. As a department head, what are the pieces of the file that led you to be able to make the recommendation that you're going to make? The highlighted things here, justification for an earlier than usual process. We have this nominal 6-year clock. Your candidate is 4 years in and you're recommending for tenure because she's a rock star. That's fine, but the committees like you to acknowledge that this is an early case, but phenomenal and we didn't see any reason to wait. Okay. We're increasingly talking with the provost, and the provost very much supports this notion of, in my words, it's on-time promotion rather than the early promotion. If it's time to promote somebody, whether it's in tenure or promotion to full professor, honestly, we ought to promote them. Why are we wedded to this 6-year clock? If someone is promotable early, and by simplifying that thought process, it gets us away from something that this used to play a really important role in, and that is, we would say early promotion should be better than just ready to promote. It should be someone who is just knocking the socks off of us. And in my mind, well, in reviewers' minds and in review committees' minds, they didn't know how to deal with that. This person looks really good, but I don't know, it's only been 4 years. Is that good enough for not waiting a couple more years? This agonizing, subjective sorts of discussions. And if you think about it, if in 4 years a faculty member has accomplished a body of work that would be fully supportive of a promotion, then isn't that by definition pretty darn good? It's better than just getting there in 6 years. They've accomplished 6 years of merit in a shorter period of time. That's pretty exceptional. So I think increasingly we're gonna see a focus on that, although we're gonna have to work carefully to make sure we're not violating any written policies, for example. But it makes perfect sense. On-time promotion. Don't focus on early, focus on when it's ready.
Can I ask about the summary of faculty discussion preceding the official vote? Is this because the department head's letter is supposed to provide some context for a split vote or something? What's the...
It certainly could.
Could there?
Yeah, so details of the report, that's in terms of summarizing what happened. I think what you mentioned is a perfectly good example where there was a split vote. Or there was discussion about, we're concerned about the stature of the journals where our candidate is published, whatever it might be. The department head, in reporting that, now this will kind of bleed over into your independent appraisal too, but it's sort of a common connection. You can say, the committee was worried, or the discussion focused on the quality of the journals, but in this emerging field of scholarship, this is the best recognized journal in the field. You've got the higher level perspective of things. That would be a good opportunity to explain a split vote. If there were abstentions, I see less of this than I used to. When I was an assistant professor and then moving up and first having my chance to vote in a tenure case, I was told if I voted no, the dean would call me in to find out why. And if I abstained, at least the dean would want to have somebody explain what that abstention was about. I don't see a lot of that explanation going on. Some of the schools, music and dance does a good job saying we had 23 eligible faculty, this many voted, 3 were out of the country, 2 are on medical leave, whatever it might have been. I think it's helpful, especially if they're dramatic things. Only half the faculty voted, or it was a very split vote. If there's one no vote, maybe people are going to be curious, but in the end it's probably not a huge deal. So put yourself, and this would be the same advice I'd give to everybody, whether it's the initial personnel committee or the dean or the FBC. You put yourself in the position of someone who wants to be fully informed, like the provost, in making the right decision. And what could be confusing about the file as it's currently presented that I can help clarify. Once the report leaves the department, and again, for most of you in CAS who do have department structure, this is always a little bit different for the schools without departments, but if you have questions, ask me afterward. This then goes to the Dean's Advisory Committee or the college level faculty personnel committee. They're going to do an informed but independent appraisal again, and this is the first group that in some regards are secondary in that they're not experts in the field. When it's in the Department of English, it's all English faculty, and maybe they're ancient British literature as opposed to contemporary French, but they still got some sense of the field. Then it goes to the Dean's Advisory Committee, and there's a chemist, a physicist, a sociologist, and a couple others. And if there's an English faculty member there, he or she's actually recused from the discussion. So interesting, but it's still a higher level perspective on things. When I worked at the NSF, I occasionally get a proposal, we could make fluorinated small amino acids to study the impacts of something or another. And at first I'd scratch my head and look around and try to find 6 expert reviewers in the area of fluorinated small amino acids. And I said, you know, if I were able to find 6 in the world, which is probably doubtful, they probably all know each other and they think this is the most important work in the world to do, because if there was something more important, they'd be doing that. But what if I ask someone over here what they think of the 6 people in the world doing this research? And they say, well, you know, they've been doing the same stuff for 50 years. They've never made any progress. It's the most ridiculous thing ever to propose. So the experts would say, this is superb. And take it a step back, you'd say it's superb for what it is, but it's ridiculous. So, you know, we don't see anything that extreme in these cases. But it's a chance to take a more general look at the file as a whole. Sometimes people worry. They say, how can you excuse the very person who's in the best position to understand my work? Well, that's one of the reasons that we have the levels of review. That person weighs in at the department level. If that person doesn't like the way the department's discussion is going and decides, you know, I'm not going to discuss at the department level, I'm going to wait because I'm on the Dean's Advisory Committee, I'll weigh in there instead. You certainly shouldn't weigh in both places. So I'll weigh in at the DAC. That's inappropriate, and there's no formal law or policy against it, but we urge people to participate at the lowest level. When Doug Blandy, Senior Vice Provost, who's in Arts and Administration, if one of the faculty in Arts and Administration is going up for promotion or tenure, he participates in the department and then recuses himself from the process throughout the rest of the events of things in academic affairs in the Provost's office. It's the right place. So in that faculty member's case, what if they're not going to be on the DAC? Well, why would you do that? Maybe because your colleagues in the DAC beg you to do so, but they're going to rely so much on your opinion that you're going to hold an unreasonable sway over them, as opposed to a case where nobody knew anything really about the scholarship as an expert. What if you disagreed with the department? The department is saying, we think that we should support this person in tenure, and you disagree, so you go to the DAC, and you've got this undue sway over them, and you present what is to them a compelling case for why they should deny tenure. Or the other way around. You get them to vote for or recommend tenure even though the entire department thought that was a bad idea. It's inappropriate. And so participation at the lowest level is what we urge. And these broader levels of review really are an essential piece of this. It's unlikely the provost will be a scholarship specialist in the field of the faculty member, unless they happen to be doing sociology of fathers in American society. So the file needs at some level to go through this level of more secondary review. At any level beyond the department, it's possible that additional information will be requested. That could include additional letters. If the Dean's Advisory Committee or the Dean or the FBC or the Provost says, you know, too many of these letters are from people who have an unhealthy relationship with the candidate, you need to get more letters. You're going to be scrambling, and that's again why I urge being proactive about making sure the letters are appropriate. Committee's vote goes forward. Yeah, it's part of the file. This should actually say it goes to academic, or to the Dean's office first. That goes to the Dean. I don't need to be repetitive here. This is the next level of the same sort of informed but independent review. Did I miss something there? No. Okay. Once the Dean comes up with a recommendation, the Dean's expected to meet with each candidate to talk about that recommendation, positive or negative. Some cases like Kaz, it could be the Associate Dean. In that meeting, you present information that you've, as a Dean, learned from the department. You don't read the letters, you certainly don't provide the letters, but the general tenor of the comments from the external letters, and usually these are really happy events, right? Because almost all our people are successful. So it's a nice meeting, summary of the recommendations made. We're required to give at least 3 days advance notice of that meeting with the Dean, because it's a meeting to discuss a major evaluation, and CBA calls for this, so we ask for that for everybody. Good luck trying to set up a meeting with fewer than 3 days notice with the Dean anyhow, right? So that's not really a problem. But keep it in mind as you're plotting those timelines forward. If the faculty member is a member of the bargaining unit, he or she can bring a representative from UA or anybody else, but that person is specifically described as an observing member. Means they sit and listen and maybe take notes, but they're not meant to be part of the conversation. Yes?
Is it 3 days notification? Is that for all meetings, midterms, 6-year post tenures?
No, this is specific for this meeting. After that meeting, the candidate can request a redacted copy of the dean's report. If it's an open file, you don't need to redact. If it's a partially closed or completely closed file, it should be redacted in accord with that waiver status. And if you have any questions about how to redact, that's something you should feel free to refer to me. Let's skip that. But this part, once the candidate has received that redacted report, he or she has up to 10 days to provide a written response. That's a new, well, they've always had the opportunity. There's never been a clock on it before, so we've never really worried about, well, what do I do with this? And the first year of it, the deans were holding on to files for 10 days in case there was going to be a response provided by the candidate. Candidates for whom the dean has said, this is an exciting opportunity, we're so happy you're here, you're doing great, I'm enthusiastically recommending tenure, don't write responses very often, okay? I think you can roll the dice on those and move them on to academic affairs and not worry about telling us later, oops, we screwed up. If you want, you could ask the candidate, the deans, or if you're department heads or assistants who can advise deans, ask the candidate, do you think you're going to want to provide a written response? And the answer is probably going to be no, and then send it on and you're done. If the recommendation is to deny the promotion or tenure, they almost always provide a written response, and so you'll want to hold on to those. I don't want to inadvertently send the file through to the FPC, have them discuss and vote, and then say, oh, by the way, we got a 15-page written document from the candidate that you might want to consider before you vote, because they have to do it again then, okay?
Isn't there a 10-day allowance as well after the department head writes their report? I know there is for contract renewal, and I assumed for tenure as well.
Pam's nodding her head, yes, I think so.
Is that right?
Yep.
Although, well,
So the candidate sees the department head's report before ever being contacted by the dean's office?
I don't think that's true, because the CBA doesn't call for the candidate to see the department head's report.
No, they meet with the department head.
You're certain? Jane's not here.
I'm under the impression that we have to do that for contract renewal.
Yeah, okay, well, it's safe to say yes, but and Pam is certain, but I'm less so. I'm going to check.
Okay.
Okay, and maybe I'll even update the slides before we post them if that's a change. The voting summary page, that's pretty self-explanatory, although somehow or another it's not when you actually sit down and try to fill it out, but you'll handle it, I'm sure. The P&T checklist looks more or less like this. We'll see it again in a minute when I get to digital, which I really should get to. Well, I got to, good. So let's just talk about it here. We have two files for you. One is called the digital promotion dossier, the other is for the supplementary file. They require you to have Adobe Acrobat Pro, and if you don't, CAS IT has a training center for where to get it and how to use it. When you get these files, I recommend you make copies and rename them, not like this, don't make them for me, okay, I'm already promoted, I'm good. But some easily identifiable titles would be good. And then when you open them up, this is when it gets complicated. If you've got a guidance document that could help you with this, oftentimes when you open them, they look like this. Sometimes they don't, but learn your way around Adobe Acrobat Pro a little bit, and it won't matter if they look like this, or you'll find a way to make them look like this. And some of you have found ways to make them look like things I've never seen before, but we're dealing as best we can. But it's a pretty simple program. You open up and you get little tiles for each of the components of the P&T dossier. And if you've worked with the old paper ones, well, they even have the same colors or close to it as we had on the old ones. So you double click on one, and sometimes you have to play around. If you double click up here, it lets you rename it. That's not very helpful. If you double click on the document, it opens up. And again, depending on which version you're using, what computer you're on, it's somewhat different, but mine most reliably now opens up, looks like this, and then there's this little tiny thing that says open file. If I click on that, then a fillable form opens up. And I can type the date in, put the candidate's name, I've got handy pull-down menus that I think cover all the possibilities, what rank the person currently has and what rank they're being recommended for. If the CBA applies, you know, honestly, the department head or the dean ought to know, but it defaults to unknown. It used to default to yes, and there was unknown, and everyone came in yes because nobody knew, but they just left it alone. So now it's helpful for us to know that, but if you don't, well, you probably should find out. Various checklists, lists of the reviewers that were, or reviews that were requested. Generally, they're outside letters, rarely. Maybe in the case of a dual appointment or something, there's inside letters requested, date requested, and so on. And this all just fills out. It's really convenient. And then when you try to close it, it'll either bring you back to here or ask if you want to save it first. It will not delete your changes accidentally. So if you went back to this, you'd filled out the form and didn't ask you to save, don't worry, because if you try to close the whole dossier, it will ask if you want to save changes before you close it. So it's got a little fail-safe. Then you go to the next form and double-click on it, and you can open it up, and so on. So you double-click on the icon, not the name. Now for each of the other units, you're going to have to put papers into them. And you used to make 4 copies of them and use the hole punch and everything. And now you just, you know, I can step you through this. So we double-clicked here on the P&T criteria icon. It opens this page. If you click Tools up here, and then you open up the side menu. Down here, you'll see Pages. If you click on Pages, then it opens up a submenu, and somewhere down here you'll find Insert Pages, Insert from File. This is definitely not for the department heads so much as for the people that are working with these files now, right? When you do that, you will, I should have had another picture in here, but it will ask you to choose the file, and you get into the usual menu choice thing. You find the file wherever you put it, and then click on it, and it'll ask if you want to do this, and if you're doing it exactly the way I showed, you'll say put it after the page that you had on the screen, click OK, and it will, I think, takes you directly back to here, and now underneath this document is that document you uploaded. Kind of cool.
There's a really easier way to do it without all those steps.
If, however you like to work with Adobe files to do it, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah, there's different ways to navigate around. I'll show you a couple other pictures, but if you don't know how to use Adobe Acrobat, it might seem intimidating, but it's not hard. And if you do know how to use it, ignore everything I'm saying and do however you want, as long as you end up uploading the right documents in the right places. Okay. Then you work your way through this, and you can upload all those documents. There are fillable forms, again, for the P&T checklist, the voting summary. We've got contents pages for the evaluation letters and teaching checklists. Those are mostly there as reminders for the things that you're supposed to do in case you're forgetting something. And this I put up as, it was going to be a vote. I'm almost done. Like, this is maybe my last slide, but here's this little inset shows what things look like with the files that's currently provided. Once I get it, the completed file, honestly, I don't really like working with these things. It loads kind of slowly on my computer, and I don't like navigating around as much. You can take a portfolio, which is what this is in the form of in Acrobat, and combine all the files into a single PDF. Then when you open it up, it looks like this, and you can open up bookmarks, and you have the main subheadings down the side. I find this a lot easier to navigate, but it is a single, very long PDF. So I don't, how many of you have worked with this document this year? Quite a few. I'll take a vote. I'm not sure it will matter, and this may evolve before next year anyhow, but how many of you think working with it opening like this is really fine? Or maybe even preferable to working with it like this? And how many would rather have it just click it and it opens up this one document and I'll navigate to the right page? I think you guys lose, but interestingly, when I get the final file, I convert it to this because when I'm on my laptop, I like navigating this around a little better. But we'll see. And again, it will probably evolve, but for now it'll look more or less like this. And then the supplementary file, it looks more like that other version. The reason is because there's really not much complexity in the supplementary file. We've got a cover sheet that lists the candidate's name and department, and then a chance to check off what's in there. Teaching evaluations, CVs for the external reviewers. We ask in the templates, we ask them to provide those, and we put those in here. And then anything else that might be in there. And then there's basically, I think I put a couple sections in for the major pieces, but you just upload whatever you want into that dossier. And sometimes you got something that's not in digital form. Increasingly, there's not very much. So the last time we were fully print, we had, let me guess, 36, 9, 12. About 20 linear feet of shelf space filled with supplementary materials. This year, so far, we've got a book. So most everything is available. Even most people's books, they've got a digital copy of. And I'll tell you, I have to resist the temptation, and I'm religiously good about this. One of my favorite things in my job is getting to look at all the scholarship from across the university. Every year there's lots of books I wish I had time to read, and there's a couple that I know I'm going to read, so I buy them. And now, I don't have to. I got a PDF right here, but I don't do that. I buy the book. Okay. And the candidate gets a book back. But if you've got things like that, or photographs that weren't digital or whatever, we'll still accept the supplementary file. Submission, we ask you to let us know. Pam will keep in good touch about all that. So far, we're having the folks bring us the files via USB drive. I think that's still kind of Luddite technology, and I imagine as soon as possible for us to have a secure website that you can upload things to. A lot of coming back to the requests for reviews, increasingly that's fully digital, including, say, like business school, and I think architecture and most of them now maybe are setting up secure websites where they give the reviewer, once a reviewer says, sure, I'll review, they give them access to the website, and they can look at all the scholarship and the portfolios and things online with no postage and no printing costs or anything. Sometimes we ask older people to review, and they don't necessarily want, I shouldn't talk about age so much, except that I'm turning 60 and it's on my mind. But you could ask if people would prefer printed or digital, and they almost always say digital's fine. But if they want print, then you can send it. Okay. And archiving, in case you wonder about that, we now require no hard copies. We are required to archive, but archiving technologies have extended to the digital domain, surprisingly enough. If you want to have a hard copy, you can do so. It's actually easy to print an entire copy from the document that you created electronically. A lot easier than it is to create the documents electronically, print them, and then turn them back into a digital form later like we used to do. I think that's it, unless there's any other questions then. Yes?
On the documents that require signatures, can they be digital signatures, like the personnel committee or?
Yes. It's I don't know if that's the official and legal answer, but it's yes. The one addendum I'll put to that is if an external reviewer sends a letter and it's unsigned, then we ask that you include a copy of the email of transmittal as well. And that substitutes for a signature. All right, well, if there's any other questions, that's how to find me. And thanks for your time. I appreciate your interest.